Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for March 18, 2019. We'll begin with the special order calendar, continued hearing items. Item number 1, 6713A, 945 Zarega Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, so this case, we have a very simple question before us, is whether we will reopen the case to rehear the evidence that was presented by DOB, which we did not decide at the last hearing. At the last hearing, we talked about it and asked both sides to brief and respond to each other's questions. So on the question of rehearing, so to not talk about the actual evidence, the appellant argues that BSA must ignore the new evidence because the photographs were available at the time of the earlier BSA cases on this matter, and appellant insists that Douglaston supports this theory, the case of Douglaston. DOB states that it was unaware of DOT's photographic archives of the highways until 2017, which post-dated BSA's last determination on this case. Appellant actually needs to demonstrate that the courts do not permit the BSA to consider for rehearing official government documents that the agency did not know existed, and I think it's very important to state these are official government documents, which has, for me, I mean, even for DOB, the highest level of credibility. It's the government taking those photographs and time-stamping them. In Douglaston, the Court of Appeals upheld BSA's refusal to rehear the case based on the appearance of an old land valuation because it determined that a projected return of income for a parcel for which a variance is sought may be based on present value rather than its original cost, and that the valuation information that was introduced as new information did not constitute substantial new evidence. The court went on to say, quote, "This is not a case where the board's decision was based on facts fraudulently misrepresented to it. The presentation made it clear that the cost of land figure represented its current value and not its actual cost. So therefore, it didn't need that old valuation. In this case, the new photographs directly refute statements made by the appellants in prior hearings. And in Zarega 1, and on I won't get into the details on that. So it directly refutes statements made in prior hearings. The appellant argues that the DOT materials were available at the time of the prior hearings. If that were so, appellant also could have availed itself and should have of the materials, not only in 2013 at the time of the first consideration of the case, but also in 1986 when it received a violation for the use which in 1987 and 1990 it cured, not by establishing the nonconformity as legal, but by filing to legalize the sign by representing to DOB that it was instead a business sign that was accessory to the warehouse in which the business was located. It could have dug into those records too if they were so available. Had the DOT records been readily available to all, appellant might have used photographs and other proofs to establish vesting that would have occurred only a few years prior to, so in 1986 or 85 when it was dealing with a violation, it wouldn't have been that long ago to be able to go to DOT and say, give us your photographs, right? Instead, it handled it another way, right, which we'll talk about if we reopen, right? In 2013, the BSA determined, let me see, I just want to make sure. Okay, I won't talk about that. So that's it. All right, so. Okay, in 2014, when the board was required to reopen the case on remand to consider its decision in light of an earlier decision on a separate case, BSA maintained this position by distinguishing the evidence in the two cases. Had DOB had access to the DOT records at the time, it surely would have brought them to light at that time. Had the records been so clearly available to all, appellant might have also consulted them to find further proofs. And I can go on because there's each step of the way, there was an opportunity for appellant also to take advantage of these kinds of records to see how it would reinforce their case, and they chose not to do that. Okay, so I think appellant's protests about the use of these materials does not ring true with me and is distinguishable from the facts in Douglaston, where the court agreed that the evaluation materials submitted years after BSA's initial decision would not have changed the outcome. And, you know, we see lots of sign cases, and many, and Commissioner Otley Brown's seen many more, and often they're brought by very sophisticated sign owners who dig into aerial photo sources, film archives, New York Historical Society photos, and the like, and it's only in the last few months, because we've seen them on another case too, that we have begun to see these DOT photos. So it's clear that they may have existed, but it was not obvious to anyone that you could go to DOT and get photographs of every 50 feet of a highway taken. I mean, who would imagine? Or 25 feet later. So, any other?
I wanted to say I agreed with what you were saying, and it seems to me that if you look at the case of Douglaston, it's not so much whether it met the threshold of new evidence, but also dealt with the relevancy of that evidence, and that was key here. And that's not the issue before us, whether or not it's relevant. It's whether it qualifies as new evidence. So I don't know if Douglaston really speaks to the issue at hand here.
Right.
In that vein, there are several other cases that are better for this particular position, that why this evidence should come in, and rather than going through that, I do want to just briefly say that there are competing interests. The one interest of having a case end when it's supposed to end, as opposed to the interest of deciding a case on its merits. And I think that through the entirety of jurisprudence, that they found that it is always better to decide on the merits, especially when it's something this material and substantial. I was persuaded by the affidavit of the Department of Buildings affidavit on how we discovered this new evidence. I believed it was forthright and forthcoming, and I believe that this type of evidence would be considered substantially new evidence, even if it was a different type of party. Now, Department of Buildings, I believe, because of its nature in these types of actions, it's not the same as two separate litigants, two separate people litigating. At that point, we don't have to go all the way down this road, but there is something to what the Department of Buildings' obligation was at the time of the original hearings, as opposed to what, in the case of Douglaston, what that civic association's obligation was. It's academic at this point, so I don't think that we need to go through that, but I think that it was important to be said on the record that there is much more here than just this is substantially new testimony. No evidence.
Can I just ask if there's going to be a vote tomorrow too on the application?
Yeah, so I think,
just wanted to-
yeah.
okay.
Because what we did the last time is we allowed both parties to brief their
Yes.
positions, which they hadn't had time to do, or let's say the owner hadn't had time to do that. And now we've fully heard the arguments. I don't think there's really anything else to do.
Okay,
on
great.
that.
Thanks.
Move on to the next case?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Item number 2, 6713A4, 945 Zarega Avenue, the Bronx. This is the application filed by Goldman Harris.
Right, so this is an application, as we
Remand.
know, this is a remand where the court was quite upset with our decision, and that's really what I wanted to just talk about. The court asked some very specific things of the BSA, and we need to be sure that we respond to each of them. So in this case, so I want to remind, if anybody doesn't know, there are almost 2,000 pages of record on this case. And it has been very, very difficult for us to review those 2,000 pages, some of which are repetitious. But buried in the repetition is, for instance, now it's possible to look at all 2,000 pages on one thumb drive, right? And you just scroll through 2,000 pages. And while you're scrolling, you think you've seen it, and then up pops a little thing you haven't ever seen before. And maybe that was presented in the case before I got here, and my attention wasn't drawn to it. So the problem is, how in the world do we, who look at these cases just a little bit before it comes to hearing, how do we put together all of these arguments in a coherent place? And then each time both DOB and the appellant come to us, they're introducing new materials, and they introduce them in a vacuum. So they introduce it as if we haven't discussed the subject at all before, and then you have to kind of, maybe you're looking at your notes and saying, wait a minute, didn't we talk about this before? And then all of us listen to the hearings, but then maybe we're missing something that, because the hearings only talk about what is talked about there, as opposed to what we reviewed and all of that, and it's really an impossible task. So the first thing that I would like to ask, and I don't want the court to admonish us, I mean, in this case, the court essentially admonished us for not working hard enough, which is really staggering, given how hard all the commissioners work to review every scrap of paper, right? So what I'm going to do is ask the parties on both sides to brief responses to each of the court's concerns and attach to those submissions the exhibits that we may have had already, but that both we and the court, understanding that this is going back to the court, both we and the court should be reviewing in connection with those arguments, even if the materials have previously been submitted, and that we will focus only on the materials submitted in terms of reviewing their arguments. We may remember that a piece of information or evidence may have been left out from that submission. That's our option to reintroduce it, but your argument needs to be complete, and it has to attach very clearly each exhibit and refer to it. And I know it's a lot of work for both parties. I know it's a lot of work for a government agency. It's a different kind of a subject, but so we need that. The court admonished the board for not taking up on appellant's offer to provide proof that the 1,585 square feet of lease space was not a principal use of the tenant Philip Morris. So that needs to be provided. But this is essentially like proving a negative. So I don't actually know how they're going to do that, and I hope the appellant will give us its complete record on the subject and not little bits of information that seem to lead to the answer that they want the outcome to be. I note with thanks on the last submission that DOB's explanation for how one would go about legalizing a non-conforming sign, because that was something the Department of Buildings, the court stated that they didn't understand. They stated that, they made this big fuss about legalizing, and I don't actually know what legalizing means. So DOB did go into some detail, but a lot of the times, because it's a government agency talking about what they do for a living, they talk about it in the middle, they start in the middle of the sentence, kind of. So what I would like them to do is go deeper into explaining, this is for DOB, what the status of a sign or any property is when it is in a state of needing to be legalized. So is the use illegal at the time when it needs to be legalized? How would an owner decide when to pursue legalization, et cetera? Would a violation have to be issued, or would the owner simply opt to do this on their own? So I need the court to really understand how the term legalization is being used when we speak. We all know what it means, but I'd like DOB to do that. The appellant made a statement that I take issue with, which is the claim that the contents of the lease, this 1988 lease, I think, was disclosed in the hearing. The commissioners and council, as I said, have reviewed all of the materials on the record, and we haven't done it just once. We've done it 5 times. And each time, and actually, we do it again, each time there's a new hearing, so we continue the hearings. We can't rely on our sort of recollection from the last hearing, so we go back and we look at the materials again. So, you know, these 2,000 pages, we've looked at 2,000 pages to see if they're relevant, okay? So we've reviewed all of the materials on the record, and when I say we, I mean we. And two of the current commissioners actually were present during the first remand hearing. So it's not true that we've all switched up. There's been continuity with two commissioners. And while the lease was submitted, I don't disagree the lease was submitted, at no time did appellant point out that there was a lease for an accessory sign, the purpose of which was to, quote, legalize the use of the advertising sign, and which traveled with a contemporaneous permit for an accessory sign. This was discovered by one of our commissioners and brought to light at hearing, to which appellant then responded with its sham argument. So we were the ones who had to uncover it as opposed to it being presented to us. There was a brief that appellant provided of the law department's briefing on the Mazza v. Avena 1999 case, which they submitted to us effectively in lieu of appellant's own brief, which I asked for in this case. Which was their way of kind of avoiding responding to the question. That case had to do with a Newport cigarette sign and the 440 square feet retail cigarette store proposed as its supporting principal use. BSA's consideration of the accessory use standards was appropriate in that case, but also does not upset the definition of accessory sign and the use in the definition of what a principal use is. The sign has to be accessory to the principal use to which it is accessory. The principal use does not have to be the principal use of the building in which it's located. It can be one of many uses in the building. In Mazza, the store sold cigarettes, so an accessory sign would have been an ad for the store itself, perhaps a photo of the store and all of the different types of cigarettes it sold. So appellant states that a permit alone should not be the basis for abandonment of a nonconforming use, but both the fact of the lease and the fact of the sign is more than a permit alone and appears to have been relied on for close to 25 years, if not longer, depending on how you read the materials. Sadly, there are no certificates of occupancy for or equivalent documents to cement the establishment of a sign as a use. This has come up in other cases, and I dare say DOB really should consider creating something of this sort going forward, because we often don't know what to call those signs. They're a use, they're in the use section, but they don't get anything that cements that that's the use on the site. However, but as we said at the last hearing, Rule 49 equates a permit with adequate proof to establish legitimacy. An appellant now argues against that very standard that helps them on other cases. And though this comment may be repetitious of previous hearings, the 1986-87 approved drawings in concert with the ES 120 and 120 business sign permits appear to show plans for an entirely new sign structure. According to the DOB's checklist of items, the permit was renewed in 1989, and the certificate of completion letter requested in 1990. So that is several years to construct the sign structure as opposed to 2. So there may be an issue about continuity that's raised in this situation. We asked at the last hearing that appellant brief us on the impact of fraud on the agencies, where an agency relies on such material to issue a permit and the owner benefits from such fraud. The appellant has demurred and decided not to do so. And citations by appellant to yet another sign, so new information, new evidence. So here we are on remand on a narrow subject, but we have new evidence introduced by appellant. Citations to the 807 Park Avenue 2013 case for some propositions still unclear is totally irrelevant to the subject case. In 807, the issue was simply had the zoning lot been legally formed according to the very clear directions in the zoning resolution? The answer to that was a simple no. And any other agreements with DOB that might have indicated the contrary could not have effectuated a zoning lot merger under the law. So to use an illegally formed, or not illegally, it simply wasn't formed. And to say it was formed because there was a handshake with DOB doesn't form it. The zoning resolution is extremely clear what forms a zoning lot, so I don't see what the relevance of that is to this case. Appellants need to be much more precise when citing to cases to support their arguments and not pull disjointed excerpts that send this board on wild chases to find relevance. I do admit with respect to DOB's argument that I'm having some trouble with their argument about the warehouse analysis, which I'd like them to explain better, with respect to Metro Self-Storage Facilities ES permits and their characterization of Philip Morris's occupancy as a warehouse. Philip Morris is a tenant with 1,585 square feet of space. So to be accessory, the sign has to be accessory to Philip Morris's tenancy, not to the entirety of the building. I didn't understand DOB's argument there. It's one paragraph that completely threw me. I don't want to go on too much longer here. DOB also needs to respond to appellant's citations in the Zariga 2 case. That is the subject of the remand. Pursuant to the court's direction. So this is again going to all the things the court complained about us not addressing. So it has to do with the DOB's past practices of allowing advertising signs to continue in light of previously issued accessory sign permits. They need to go through that very carefully and give an extremely clear explanation of what they've been doing with those signs, because of course enforcement started in 2013, right, more or less, or maybe kind of as the sign rules were changing. So appellant, as I said, introduced 2 new signs into the record to make its case. The photo shows the Burma B-Bus sign on Borden Avenue. It looks like in the place it's supposed to be, which is subject to the 2000 accessory sign permit, so I didn't understand that. So they needed to be clearer about that submission. But DOB explained that accessory sign application, that those accessory sign applications were withdrawn in 1999, and a DOB inspection confirmed no abandonment of advertising use. So that was taken care of. And then another sign was produced, a 1971 permit for an accessory sign on Van Wyck, but the appellant doesn't explain whether the use subsequently converted legally to advertising prior to the vesting date in 1979. But DOB does explain that the signs were legalized as non-conforming. So again, by introducing more and more evidence that's really not, I mean, they're arguing that DOB shouldn't be allowed to introduce more evidence, right? And here's more evidence being introduced. And so this is, let's just say, not fair, but it's also making it, sending BSA on further chases to figure things out, forces DOB to chase and to respond, and maybe then to introduce new information, and we shouldn't have any more of it unless we specifically ask for it. Let me see. And then just to pick up on the bus lines case, the 338 Bruckner Boulevard case is exactly on point on this case, just to finish up with that. And I would like to direct the court, because the court's going to read this transcript, to read the decision on that case, which discussed the issue of sham leases very clearly, and considered the applicability of the 2368 case, the 12th Avenue case. And both of those arguments are made by the appellant in that case that are made here, but which nonetheless, and the BSA nonetheless decided that the permit for an accessory sign was valid and indicated a discontinuity of an established advertising sign. That decision was upheld and leave to appeal denied at the Court of Appeals. So, and I don't want to go on too much more, but I have excerpts from that case where the BSA asks and answers the identical questions posed in this case. And this is the one I will read. Whereas accordingly, at hearing, the board questioned why there was no attempt in 1981 to legalize the sign as an advertising sign under Section 4253 of the zoning resolution. In response, the appellant speculated that the evidence of the sign's establishment and/or continuous use was unavailable at the time. Whereas thus the board observes that it is reasonable to conclude that the 1981 permit was obtained for an accessory sign because there was insufficient evidence to support a permit application to grandfather an advertising sign pursuant to the 1980 amendment to Section 4253 and 5261 of the zoning resolution. And, let's see. And then as to the value of the permit, the board observes that according to the TPN 14 of 88, the highest value documentation for demonstrating a use is a record from a city agency. The 1981 permit is a record from a city agency, namely DOB, the agency responsible for regulating the use and the occupancy of buildings by issuing the 1981 permit. So I just want to close by saying the board has been here before, and the courts have agreed with its determination in the past. So, any other comment?
Fully agree with everything you said, and I strongly would second your statement of the fact that we have gotten too many additional information which is just kind of distracting us from the focus of the project, what is at hand, and we need to focus on the material that has been given, and these material have to be provided in a very chronological way and with the associated exhibit so that we can clearly follow the arguments and the historical change in the signage. And I think over the time, the documents have been submitted in different ways, and it has just kind of confused and muddled the matter. We need to just clean it up.
Anyone else?
Sorry.
Good, go ahead. Yeah.
Item number 3, 3858BZ, 18417 Horace Harding Expressway, Queens.
Okay. So we were provided with the photos of the repaired fences, and they were painted. There was revised plans that were provided where the bollards will be replaced with sidewalk, and new pump dispenser would be located. After that, we received a letter from the Urbandale Civic Association indicating, agreeing that the brick fence have been repaired. However, there's a gate in the rear that needs to be fixed, and they do agree that the dumpster needs to be enclosed. And they also noticed some additional conditions. They saw some unplated cars and business trucks with snow on it, and however, they're recommending approval with conditions. So we would like the applicant to kind of just clarify why some of these vehicles were parked there. Now, the latest submission, revised plan that was submitted, they do indicate the dumpster has been enclosed, or will be enclosed with a 6-foot-high chain link fence that with 100% opacity. The sidewalk dimension that has been shown on the plan is 2 feet wide. Now, I clearly remember at the hearing, last hearing of back in October, Chair, you had stated that the bollards be removed and be replaced with sidewalk, specifically to protect the pedestrians from vehicular movement. So I'm not sure if a 2-foot wide sidewalk is enough to provide a safety area, for a pedestrian to stand, and definitely not some. It's not going to be ADA accessible either. You need minimum of 3 foot for that. Right. So I think at a minimum that has to be 3 foot wide. So I would like the applicant to kind of hopefully provide a revised submission just by extending it by 1 foot. Any?
I'm curious whether that affects the
I have a feeling it does.
maneuverability.
It does.
Which is why they've been trying these bollards all this time.
Right.
And the reason is because of that extra pump. Otherwise, you wouldn't worry about maneuverability, I don't think.
Right.
So, yeah, that's interesting. Because the other thing that they did for handicap, for ADA access is, in order to get into the store, you never have to go on the sidewalk, you stay on the pavement. So the sidewalk is really just wrapping around the building. You see, you stay down on the pavement.
Right.
So,
And the 2-foot will further put the pedestrian away from the building and will
because
be
they can't
more.
walk on it.
They cannot
Right.
walk on the sidewalk there, and this will raise more conflict.
Yes. Oh, that's interesting.
There was a touch screen, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
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 Item number 4, 64559BZ, 10824 Fountains Avenue, Brooklyn.
I think the only issue we had last time was the trash enclosure, and the applicant stated that they were fixing it and painting it, and photos have been provided with the doors enclosed and painted. It looks nice. Any questions?
Item number 5, 5899BZ, 18-10 Utopia Parkway, Queens.
Okay. So, we had some concerns on this one, specifically with regards to excess vehicles that were identified parked on the sidewalk, the trash enclosure. The applicant is proposing to enclose this trash, which would be located at the corner of 9th Avenue and Utopia Parkway. And I think that is a location we had recommended, and they're achieving that by relocating the existing air and vacuum station away from that intersection. They're also proposing to add additional parking space, so the total number of parking spaces would increase from 6 to 7. I, though, would like them to see if it was possible to add another parking space between the parking space number 4 and 5. And this would be a tandem parking space. And I'm saying that because I'm assuming that some of these cars parked on the side would be there for repair. And so the on-site attendant can maneuver some of these, and so that may provide for additional parking spaces. In addition, in this revised plan, the applicant is also proposing to reorient the fueling station and increase the fueling station from 4 to 6. This reorientation definitely does improve the movement, vehicular movement within the site, and it does allow, free up more space for vehicles to park. So I think that's a good sign. However, the applicant is proposing a revised hours of operation, and it's not clear from the earlier resolution if the gas station is open 24/7, so I would like the applicant to clarify that. I looked through the earlier resolution and it was not clear. The applicant is proposing to modify the hours of operation for the automotive service, which is currently Monday to Friday, 6:30 to 8 p.m. and 5:30 to 7 p.m. on Saturday. The applicant is proposing to change the hours of operation for automotive service from 6 to 10 p.m. 7 days of the week. 6
a.m.
6 a.m., sorry, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days of the week. I do have concerns regarding this. First of all, this is a residential area, and we never, I don't think I've seen any automotive repair use in that is located within a residential area to have a Sunday operation. And we tip, and also so late. So I will not be comfortable, and I don't think this would be in the best interest of the location. We should retain the same hours or maybe make some adjustment, but definitely not extend it to Sunday.
Right. I agree with that.
And we had asked last time if the sidewalk has been repaired, and I'm assuming if there's going to be a significant change as part of the overall, maybe it would be done as part of that, so I would like that to be clarified. Any other?
Yeah, I just have, they submitted an operational plan for parking and security, and it's quite detailed, and I think all the details of it should be incorporated into the resolution as part of the conditions.
Yes.
Move on. Item number 6, 22300BZ, 272 West 10th Street, Manhattan.
So the German,
Adjournment request.
Also adjournment for April 23rd.
we'll see. We don't know.
Item number 7, 16-12BZ, 184 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn.
Applicants engaged additional counsel and an architect to review the drawing submission to ensure that it is not a departure from the August 31st, 18 set of drawings, which were supposed to have from which the elevator stop at the roof was supposed to have been removed and environmental notes added, and that this was the one where the drawings changed significantly between one day and the next, and no one told us, and the building got taller. So, so the instruction was the same exact drawings as the 831 set, except for removing the elevator stop and adding environmental notes. Changes were made nonetheless, but the only substantive change I see is the enlargement, and that's just because those are the ones I see, because it's not like we got bubble drawings. You know? But, so the change is the enlargement without mention by the cover letter of the meat kitchen adjacent to what is labeled, quote, "the auditorium," and the elevator on the right side of the building now only serves the mezzanine level from the women's entrance and doesn't go any higher. The use for which, I have to say, is obvious. Plans always reveal the intended use. We've been told this will not be used in the way that we might imagine it will be used, but why would the elevator need to have one stop at the mezzanine? So anyway, the date of these drawings is February 27th, 19. And there was a revised tech memo submitted. I'm not really sure even why. But I don't know if we have sign off on it. I'm not sure why there was a revised tech memo. The building is not supposed to be any taller according to the base plane modified, but the NAVD 88 elevation is the same on the August 31st drawing.
She's asking about the tech memo, there was a revised tech memo, I don't remember why.
So on this one, so we need to look into whether the tech memo is signed off, because that's our seeker issue.
Was the old tech memo signed off? Is that the question? Or is
No, this is a new tech memo, because, when you don't change the building, you don't need a new tech memo. But when you change the building between one set of drawings that we thought we were voting on and another, then you need to change the tech memo, and I don't know why it was changed, and that wasn't explained. Right? So that just makes me suspicious that there were further changes to the drawings that we don't know about. But anyway, the enlargement of the kitchen, where they take up more sort of lobby area, where the students, by the way, are supposed to use to get to their staircases and so on, to create a much larger meat kitchen, reveals something to me, which will affect the conditions. Okay, anybody else?
This is an M use.
Yes,
right?
it's an M
Sorry,
use.
M zone,
Yes.
this is an M zoning district, and a banquet catering hall is permitted. However, it has a different parking requirement.
Yes, indeed.
So I think we need to be very clear in all the documents and in the plans and in our resolution that should there be any use.
No, the use is
that-
prohibited.
It is prohibited, but as of right, it is permitted.
No, this is a variance?
No, it's a special permit.
It's a
Oh, no,
special-
I'm sorry, this is a special permit? Oh, okay.
So if the use is permitted as of right, however, has a different parking requirement,
They
then
have to
they
comply with
have to
it.
comply with the
Yes.
underlying zoning requirements with regards to
Right.
parking. And until that has been provided, DOB should not issue any approval
Mm-hmm.
of the change of use.
Right, okay. So, from the very beginning, we said, we know that you're going to be using this as a banquet hall. It looks like one. And they kept saying over and over again, it's not. It's the auditorium for the school. So then why do you have an elevator that stops at the mezzanine, which is where the bride changing room is? That's where the green rooms are. That's how they're used, right? So, yeah.
It just affects the environmental, because we did not do the
Yes.
environmental analysis based on a
Right.
banquet and the
No.
parking requirements.
You
So
don't think we
it
did.
completely changes the environmental review.
Yes.
And that's the other reason why we need to have it.
Okay. Well, our original, yeah, but I would say that they can't change the use without our approval. We reviewed this as a school in a manufacturing district. Then therefore, it becomes a BSA case. Any changes in use have to come back to us. So it's not like it's okay to just switch out the use because the use is permitted in the district, right? It's not associated with a school to have a banquet facility. A commercial banquet facility, right? It's a different use. Okay, we'll make that clear in our conditions.
Move on? Mm-hmm. New cases, item number 8, 27886 BZ, 1677 Bruckner Boulevard, the Bronx.
Okay. Yes. We have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends conditional approval, but what they really wanted was the contact information for the owner, which I hope was given, because that's all they asked for. I think the site looks well-maintained based on photos, but I didn't see photos of the perimeter that's shared by adjacent properties, so I'm interested in hearing comments about site visits, and the lumen levels are high at the property line that is shared with the church. Any site visit observations?
I actually been to the site, and this was before us beforehand. This is a very deep site with a lot of space between the drive aisle for the drive-through and the adjacent homes in the back. And the site, as you said, is very well maintained, and there's a large area that's grassy in the back, but there's also a huge boulder that's like kind of sticking out, and that also provides additional screening for the residential behind it. And in the spring and the summer, the site really looks nice because of the flowers, and they really do a very good job here.
Okay, great.
Next?
Yeah, just let me finish that.
Yeah?
Just one. Yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
we're still on Bruckner.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask if there could be clarified as to whether there's a change in operator. I think there might be some confusion in the submission, whether it's still a Popeyes or.
No, it's White Castle.
White Castle.
It
This
always
is
had,
White
this has been a
Castle.
White
It's
Castle
always-
for about
always been.
50 years.
The last one,
Yeah.
the last few.
It's
Okay.
Oh,
it's very visible from
curious how that Popeyes came into the picture. Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Item number 9, 12693 BZ, 1225 East 233rd Street, the Bronx.
So in the files, I did not see the proof of service of initial application or the proof of notice of hearing.
Right.
We should confirm that for tomorrow.
So please confirm that before we,
It's there.
We have it, it was an issue with it, and it's been resubmitted back up.
It's been
Resub-
Submitted, it was an issue of Vincent uploading it to the system, but
Okay.
it's there.
It was re-uploaded, okay.
Okay, thank you, because I know it's hard.
Okay.
so, unlike the White Castle site, this site has a lot of
Do
problems.
you have the community board recommendation? I have that.
Yes, the community has approved it, 29 in favor, 2 abstention. However, the community board also recommends that applicant needs to file Alt 1 for a new CO to sell vehicles on the site, and they need to add a note that ability for BSA to claw back variance if owner does not comply with DOB requirement clawback. That's an interesting.
Clawback, we should have clawback hearings.
I think we'd have to first define clawback.
I know.
FDNY submit a letter of no objection. There are 2 open violations, and they're ECB related, construction related, and both of them are outstanding. The compliance chart that has been provided is incorrect and definitely does not seem to go with, in the details of all the prior resolutions. That needs to be corrected. For example, one of the requirement was that the fence had to be opaque, especially abutting the residential property. The photographs clearly indicate that it's not, and as a matter of fact, the fences are in pretty bad condition. Per 2005 approval, 2 curb cuts were permitted on East 233rd Street, and the existing condition still has not corrected that. And per existing condition plan, there are tire racks that are shown located outside in the rear area that is abutting the residential use. That was not permitted in the previous approved plan, and definitely not indicated in the previous approved plan. I did not go on, was not able to do a site visit, but based on the Google Street View, I saw additional tire racks that were located along the frontage of Baychester Avenue and along the entire frontage of Remier Drive. The photos that has been provided of the existing lawn seems non-existent. It seems to be used as a parking lot. That's again not consistent with the plans that were approved. So we definitely need interior photos of the existing condition. The location of the trash dumpster is not shown in the plan, photographs not provided. As I mentioned, landscaping is non-existent. Site needs significant cleanup. Lighting level, based on the photos provided, there is excess lighting, and it is definitely affecting the residential properties abutting it. They need to provide a lumen plan, and also based on the Google map, there are more vehicles parked on the site than indicated on the plan. So they need to evaluate. There is space, so they need to evaluate the site plan and see if they can accommodate all the parking needs on the site and not have it spill over onto the sidewalk. Those were my comments.
I actually went to this site, and there appears to be a tire repair company operating behind the building that is probably independent of the actual service station itself. And there are tires everywhere behind the building, on the racks, off the racks, stacked up against the residential lot line. The site is full of clutter and debris, like old rusted auto snow shovels and discarded car bumpers. On Deremer Avenue, there's a whole line of tire racks that are now empty, probably because, they wanted them to try and clean up the site, but they left the tire racks, which leads you to think that as soon as, we vote on this, if it's in their favor, they're just gonna stack, and hundreds of tires. That's how many tire racks there are. It's like 3 or 4 levels. Seems to be excessive signage on this site, so it definitely needs to be reduced and broken out by frontage as well. And, of course, there's no landscaping, and there should be landscaping and screening.
So you know where the tires are? They're on the roof. So I did a satellite view.
They threw them on the
and
roof.
I'm like, what?
It's a
So
sound
there's
insulation.
hundreds of tires on the roof of
So
this
hiding
one-story building. And I don't know if anyone's here from the applicant. However, that is super dangerous from a structural point of view, because roofs are not intended to carry that much weight, and a tire is heavy. There's also other stuff up there, which I can't tell what it is from the satellite view, but that's what parapet walls are for, to hide your tires. So, yeah, so that's scary from a structure, from a DOB and a fire department perspective, because they're combustible also.
Right. And the applicant also submitted consumer affairs license, which was, I guess, granted for secondhand
Yeah,
auto
but-
dealership, but that has expired.
Right.
So provide us with a,
So they need to
So they
provide
need
us,
to update.
right, and also needs to be in the statement, because that's not a use that we had reviewed.
Right.
And we need to consider whether that's something we would allow.
Right.
That is a
this-
great deal of tires up there.
What?
There is a lot. of
There are
tires.
hundreds of tires up there.
It's remarkable that it's not having the ceiling cave in.
Well, if they've only been up there, it takes a little while before the building decides it's tired and it's going to give up.
Tired.
Yes,
Right. to collect water. They collect
with a
water.
Y.
That gives you an indication of
126
how many
92
racks there are on Deremer Ave.
Right.
That have to be empty.
Should do an inspection.
Just one more thing, I believe the pavement and the concrete, especially the concrete one, and even the asphalt one, I believe they need some, like,
Yeah,
sort of
needs to be-
resurfacing.
Yeah.
See too many cracks there.
okay. Okay.
Item number 10, 27109 BZ, 13240 Metropolitan Avenue, Queens.
Sorry, just one second. So in this case, we do have the proof of service of the initial application and the proof of notice of hearing to officials. Community has voted in favor, 26 in favor, 1 abstention. This is an application for PCE. It's the grant, I guess, expires or has.
Expired.
It did expire
Yeah, January.
January of 2019. So they're just proposing an extension of term, no change in the operator hours of operation or in the layout. I just had one question. I think in the plan, it shows there is a massage room, so they need to provide the license for the massage therapist. Therapists, don't know how many. Any other questions?
Zoning calendar continued hearing items. Item number 11, 26315 BZ, 4547 Little Clove Road, Staten Island.
So they requested an adjournment. This is the third adjournment, so we need to send them a dismissal warning letter, unless there's some really unusual reason why it's adjourning. You know,
Just need more time.
yeah, so more time equals dismissal warning, because the last time we heard this was in August with 2 adjournments.
Okay.
Okay.
Item number 12, 2016-4217 BZ, 1665 Bartow Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay. So since our last hearing, the
Which was January of last
Jan-
year.
Right, January of last year. We are back, and the applicant has submitted revised plan. And the applicant is proposing to retain the automotive laundry at the site. However, the orientation is different. Well, the entrance orientation is different. Instead of the access to the auto laundry being from Bartow, it would be from East Gun Hill Road. And they're making this argument because East Gun Hill Road is more of a commercial use in nature, and therefore providing the access from there would minimize the impact and also allow for 10 reservoir spaces on site. At the last hearing, we had clearly directed them to abandon the car wash on this site. This is not a big site to have a gas service station, a car cleanup service, and a convenience store, and accommodate all the necessary reservoir spaces or parking spaces. The plans that has been submitted, while it shows the various maneuvering plans, I think it will interfere with the vehicles exiting the gas pump and the vehicles waiting in the queue to get into the car service from East Gun Hill Road. East Gun Hill Road is a major thoroughfare, and it is coming uphill. Correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner Otley Brown, it's coming uphill, and it's kind of at the highest, one of the highest point at that site. So when the vehicles are backing up for those waiting in queue, we do see it. I mean, there are two entryways to this car wash. One is through the site and the other one is through the Gun Hill Road. That will result in a significant amount of backup of traffic along the East Gun Hill Road and also vehicles turning from Bartow. This is as the applicant has stated, this is a very active thoroughfare. All three roads are very active, and any additional backup is just going to create a havoc there. So, given the frequency of crashes that's been provided, while the applicant states that the frequency of crashes does not exceed the threshold of a high crash location per SECRA, I'm just not convinced that the relocation of the car wash to East Gun Hill Road would minimize it. I feel, on the contrary, that it may result in more accidents at the corner because of the backup of the vehicles. And it will also confuse the circulation within the site. Those vehicles that are, after they fill up the gas, those vehicles will have to exit, and they will be conflicting with those vehicles that are waiting in queue along East Gun Hill Road. So I'm not convinced, even with their own attendants trying to maneuver everything, it will resolve the issue. And also, depending on the range of car cleanup services that are provided, oftentimes we know there's pre-car and post-car cleanup that happens outside that building, which can also affect the usage of the space and more backup. And the neighborhood study that has been provided indicates that the change from an accessory auto repair shop to an accessory car wash will not alter the neighborhood. I do not agree with that, because I do think, as I said, it will affect more traffic backup, and there will be more vehicles idling, waiting in queue for car wash, so that's an air quality issue. Noise from the car wash machine would be continuous, which also is an additional issue. And those are my primary concerns.
I agree with you as to the intensity of use on this relatively small gas station lot. I think that introducing the car wash, even with the reverse direction, is still going to introduce cars all along the site trying to get onto the reservoir lane, and that's going to interfere with the cars that are going through the MPDs to fill up with gas. I just don't see this really working here, and I think it's going to cause a lot of commotion on this site. But to me, a bigger issue for me is the proof of continuous use, because if you go back to the previous grant having expired September 29, 2008, between September 29, 2008 and February 7, 2011, there's only one piece of information that is the proof of continuous use, and that's an affidavit of the eviction attorney that handled the eviction of the previous tenant. And to me, to base the continuation of use solely on an affidavit is problematic. And if you look at the rest of the list of proof of continuous use, there are receipts for delivery of gas, there's certificate of inspections from Department of Consumer Affairs, there are gas sale receipts, going straight through from February 7th, 2011 to basically till September 29, 2016. And so to me, the list is more telling by what's missing from September 29, 2008 to February 7th, 2011 than actually what's there, because there are no receipts for delivery of gas during that time, there are no certificates of inspection from Department of Consumer Affairs, and there are no gas sale receipts. So that makes me question the credibility of the affidavit that was submitted.
And it was submitted for a different purpose anyway. The affidavit was created for a different purpose, so not to prove continuity of use, it was really...
Which kind of lends it to be, while I agree that there should be a lot more done as far as evidence of continuous use, I believe that If they were if there was continuous use, that they would certainly have certain evidence, and they should find that and submit
Yeah.
that. That being said, I believe that the affidavit, because it was for another purpose, does lend to credibility of a real document, and that the statements made therein are true. I think that there's a lot more they should do on that.
But in a simple eviction just means your tenants are still holding over, right?
Right.
So they could have two pieces of paper there,
Right.
and they never pumped a single gas, right, for the last 4 years, kind of thing.
Right, it may
They
not
could-
be open and operating
Right,
during that
right.
time.
So that's the thing, and if they're in litigation, they could have easily abandoned for financial reasons, all kinds of things
Or
like
just
that.
held up shop and waited there till they were paid to leave.
Yeah.
They could,
Right, any
a lot-
number of, right. But in terms of the car wash use, I agree, in addition to which, it still moves all the egress from the car wash right next to that house and onto the area, which is really a residential area on that side, right? And we had, I think it was 100 letters of opposition on this.
I briefly, this was before my time, but I briefly reviewed the video. It seems like this was already discussed on the last date, that, and the candidate was aware of the board's position, not favorable view of the car wash. I was not sure.
Yeah,
I thought that something was going to change from, I didn't expect this.
I think I was surprised when I saw the reintroduction of the car wash, because at the last hearing, we thought right during the public hearing, we were told that they're going to abandon the car wash use, and we walked away saying, okay, you shall, and we reaffirmed that. So it was a little surprising to get.
Right, and then we were just going to move on with the subject of this continuity and improvement of the site because they took down that shed, et cetera, or was supposed to have taken down the
I mean,
shed.
they made some arguments in the traffic analysis how having a car wash versus a convenience store will not have any difference in terms of the vehicular movement and impact, but I don't think that's the
I believe,
point.
yes, I recall that he said the equipment was like taken away, some piping would be dug out and removed.
Right,
And it was a surprise for me to see the car wash, like
Still.
still there.
yeah.
So,
The other thing that I wanted to just say for the record, because obviously nobody's in favor of the car wash, I don't think that the traffic analysis accurately represented the situation. For one, it uses a delta between having a convenience store there versus a car wash, but that's not the current use on the site, so where does a convenience store come in as the base? The base should be simply a pumping station with a little bit of a shop there to get oil and things like that, in which case there's a double in the number of trips that are generated by the car wash. That's the first. And then the other thing is, it just talks about the car wash attracting users. It doesn't talk about, this is a very complex intersection, and it doesn't talk at all about the impacts of queuers, drivers, and so on, leavers, drivers in both directions, affecting the signalization at this very strange, confusing intersection. So it really just intentionally seems to ignore what happens to the roadway, right? So I don't think that that's correct. And fire department, and by the way, objected to this application in April 2018. So I don't know whether there's been any response to that. I didn't find any. And also the car wash, again, we were very concerned about the impact of residents on Tiemann. And by putting a building there and all that egress there, you can no longer provide a buffer zone to the residents. The whole idea, we were going to landscape that one spot to keep the residents protected from the activity on this pretty, kind of an aggressive use inside of a residential district on that side. Oh, and then they provided a lumen spread diagram that spreads across the adjoining property.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, so we're not across, but into it, it's like 3 inside the resident.
I think that's a commercial use, so the 3 is in the commercial, but it's
Yeah, but
0 by
still.
the residential, but, yeah,
It's not your property.
right.
Light trespass. Okay. Oh, sorry, there was just a couple of other things. There are 14 open ECB violations, but it looks like the penalties were paid or written off. And there's a stop work order still in place with a $1,000 penalty for violating it. And we never decide on cases where you have open penalties. I guess the stop work order penalty is really a DOB penalty, and it didn't move to ECB, and that worked. Okay.
Item number 13, 2016-4273BZ, 669 Second Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay. I just want to make a note, this case was not adjourned at the last hearing.
Oh, that's right.
We heard it.
Yeah.
We thought it was going to be adjourned, but we actually had a conversation about it, so that needs to be corrected on the calendar. At the February hearing, the applicant requested more time to do some research on the sign's history. It apparently found no additional information and rests on its prior arguments. I think the commissioners made their positions clear at the prior hearings, and we can close and vote on this.
Item number 14, 2016-4469BZ, 49-23 Story Boulevard, Queens.
They requested adjournment.
Item number 15, 2017-247BZ, 1367 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
So this case, we've been working on the retention of 50% of the existing exterior walls at the exterior. At the last hearing, I stated that they needed to retain more than 40% of existing walls on the second floor, and this wasn't done. And it's such an easy task to accomplish, since the difference between the existing and the proposed wall on the side is really negligible, and you don't need to retain the entire side wall, just a little portion of it, and you would get 50%. And I also talked about that you can't use portions of the attic towards this count, especially where the existing attic doesn't count as floor area, but there needs to be more retention on the second floor, because that really is effectively demolition otherwise. There's still a conflict between the notes on the second floor demolition plan with respect to the retention of existing joists, and that conflicts with the section that indicates they're to be raised. And I didn't see the note that states that removal of existing exterior walls and joists in excess of that shown on the plans would void the special permit. So I'm actually not sure if there were any changes made to these drawings. I started to think, well, all my comments are the same, so what changes were actually made to the drawing?
Just one comment, the floor area information that has been provided in the plan, it is different from the zoning chart and statement of facts, so they all need to be correct.
And I think that was a comment at the last hearing, so I get the feeling that we got a resubmission of what was submitted before with a new cover letter. I think. And that's- Okay.
Item number 16, 2018-20BZ, 2801 Avenue M, Brooklyn.
The project was revised slightly. I think the attic addition is now somewhat less terrible than it was before, but it is still lopsided and is still of limited utility, since most of the head height is under 6 feet, actually, not 7 feet, or at least that's what I have to deduce from the floor plan, because it doesn't show the areas that actually achieve a 7-foot clear height. And also, they didn't provide an axonometric from both sides, so you only see it from one side, and you really need to understand this building all the way around. And there's an area at the rear of that addition that's not using the same sloping roof line that gets you to the corner. And I don't understand the reason for that. So it's, the thing that made it a little bit less terrible is that the roof line slopes directly from the wall height, but then it doesn't. So, so there's also an alternative, which we directed them to provide. The alternative plan doesn't have the rooftop addition, and which is, I think, is much more respectful of the building and the neighborhood. I don't think this building really can handle this type of an addition, or if there were one, it should be a lot smaller. Maybe that's part of why the architect is just assuming that he should approach this the same as he does all of his buildings. And this is a very different typology, and it needs to be approached in a different way. But I frankly think we've looked at this long enough, and we should just vote on it, and however it falls. Any other? No. Yeah, we've already had 3 hearings on it. It's enough for a little house, yeah.
Okay. Item number 17, 2018-21 BZ, 1773 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, at the last hearing, we said the attic is too high. I didn't see any adjustments made to it. It is still too high. We also asked that the floor area be brought down to 1 FAR. The zoning calculation sheet shows it at over 1, while the plans show it under, so which is it? And what was modified on the plans that brought it down according to the drawings? You can't just change the number, you have to actually change the drawings. And they provided sections but the layers, there were 2 layers of text on at the same time, so you can't read the text, it's illegible. That's it. Anything else?
The statement of fact is also incorrect with regards to the side yard reduction.
But the other things are correct?
Yeah, and as you pointed out, the zoning chart analysis is also incorrect.
And the rear yard.
And the rear yard, yes.
The rear yard what?
Is also, there's a discrepancy.
There's a discrepancy in the rear yard, I'm sorry, yes. I think the rear yard depth increases to 32 feet based on the revised plan. However, that's not reflected in the zoning chart.
Yeah.
Item number 18, 2018-138 BZ, 257 West 17th Street, Manhattan. We received a request for withdrawal.
Yeah, like on Friday, like at 5 or something, right?
That was yesterday.
Oh, yesterday, yeah, yesterday. Days blending together, yesterday, right, sorry.
New cases, item number 1, 2018-143 BZ, 20 West 14th Street, Manhattan. This is a special permit for PCE immunization.
So we have received proof of service of initial application and proof of notice of hearing to officials. Community board voted in favor, 42 in favor, 2 opposed. We don't have anything in our record indicating if the neighborhood, the residents of the building and the neighboring businesses were notified, but we have received letters of opposition from the residents, so I'm assuming they're very much aware of it. The complaints, this is a PCE that is going to be located, this is a through lot, so the PCE is going to be located on...
Not going to, is.
Yeah, it is. Okay, that's another question, because the application says under construction.
Yes.
However, the website is up, so I don't, and it seems there were some tests that were done, so...
It's operating since
The
January,
neighbors
it
have
seems
said
like.
It's
It is-
open.
it is
since
open.
January
Okay.
2019.
Okay. So, it's not clear from the application submitted what kind of training that is provided based on the website. It seems it's, the class types include dance, toning, high-intensity interval training, yoga, but it's not clear if weights are being used. And the noise complaint, the letters that we received from the residents, they are all related to noise. The noise that was very, very, very audible at the lobby entrance and also on the second floor and a third floor apartments and hallways. And we have letters from the residents of apartment 2B and also from the 13 West 13 Apartment Corporation. asking us to deny the application because they had asked Fit House to do a joint noise test, which has not happened, and they must. They must do a noise test. And the drawings that has been submitted does show noise attenuation measures. We don't know if those have been carried through, so we need some documentation clarifying that has been carried through and noise test has to be done. And we also need to understand if the sound system is on limiter or not, because that was one of the complaints, that they are hearing the music and the instruction very clearly.
Yes.
And the letters have stated that they are aware that the sound limiter was installed, actually, but still, after the installation, they're having complaints. There's still noise.
And they added some additional walls. Even after that, the sound is quite audible.
Right, and the drawings show, normally when we have these gyms that come to us before they're constructed, we ask them to show acoustical attenuation drawings. And these drawings show lots of acoustical attenuation that's proposed. It may have been badly installed or not installed or who knows what, because it seems with all of that work, it shouldn't be so that you can hear what the instructor says, move your left foot, and you can hear it on the second floor to move your left foot. So that, also, though, we're missing DOI and we're missing fire department. And the short answer for the owners is they have to take care of this, and we have a withdrawal today of a gym that became an enormous nuisance for the neighbors to the point where the gym was shut down both by the courts and by us.
Right.
So, and they just now have decided to move on to another location.
I also just wanted to flag for the applicant, the floor area schedule on plan sheet 1 is inconsistent, so if they could just look at that and consolidate their floor area calculations for the total PCE space, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, but we also need DOI, so that's very,
Said that.
right.
We need a FEMA map as well, I didn't see it.
Yeah, just a firm map, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Item number, excuse me, 2017-243BZ, 2916 Francis Lewis Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, so we have received proof of service of initial application and proof of notice of hearing to officials. The community board voted 38 in favor, 1 against, 2 abstention to approve the project. Borough President also has submitted a letter of an approval. We have 1 support letter and 1 opposition. The opposition states that they smell gas fume from the station pump, and there is U-Haul establishment, and that the station is dirty, and the owner or the tenant of this establishment uses on-street parking.
It spills onto the street, I think. I actually counted 2 letters of each. 2 in support and 2 in opposition.
Oh, okay, all right, so I think from the photos that has been provided and from the Google Street View, the site looks well maintained, and I did not see any U-Haul establishment.
No, they're saying that there wasn't a proposed any longer.
They're not.
Removed
They
that
have
from the
removed that
application.
operation,
There
right.
must have been a U-Haul proposed at the
That's-
early submission time. They initially submitted it in 2017, and they got a dismissal warning letter in 18, so it must have been
Afterwards,
that, yeah.
I think my only comment on this one is that the light spread should be 0 at the lot line, especially when it's abutting the residential lots, and the lumen diagram shows that it's at a slightly elevated level at the, especially the residents along the Francis Lewis Boulevard. I really did not have any other comments. I think the site looks in pretty good condition. It is consistent with the prior compliances in terms of the number of parking spaces and the location. And in the prior approval, we didn't ask for any landscaping and whatever is there is pretty well maintained.
It is. Did you visit the site?
No, I did
No,
not. I
okay,
just
so,
I was there many years
Okay.
ago, but that
did
wasn't.
anyone do a site visit of this? Okay, because I thought actually from the photos, the landscaping actually looked pretty sad. And they showed these four empty planter pots that also just by themselves looked sad, but they had no plants in them. So I think it does need to be done, and we didn't get photos of the perimeter of the site to understand the impact of this site on the adjoining residential property or of the trash. We didn't also get photos of the trash storage area so that we can better understand how it's managing those things that are usually problematic. And I just wanted to point out again on the compliance chart, you know, when we get these charts, they always talk about whether they're in compliance with the terms of some prior grant. So the prior grant, not this most recent one, but the one before, said that only 3 curb cuts were approved. And so they write in the compliance, does it comply? Yes, but there's 4 curb cuts. So the later approval allowed the 4 curb cuts, but it's not accurate to say that at the time when you had 4 and only 3 were permitted, you're in compliance unless you explain it, right? People are just not precise enough on those charts. Okay.
Oh, there's a typo if they're submitting a new statement. Page 1 of the statement says the last grant expired 12/26/2015, and then page 2 of the statement says the grant expired 12/16/2015. So they just have to correct one of those.
Also, I believe the compliance officer had visited the site and shared pictures
Oh,
for this one.
oh, so that's on, okay, good. Yeah, it's true, we get these announcements of site visits, so, you know.
Yeah, it's like on a different SharePoint.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Just
I'm sorry.
regarding the FEMA map, I want to locate the site on the FEMA map because the firm that they submitted doesn't indicate where the site is, and it doesn't even have a label with the application. So just put the site location on the map.
Okay.
Item number 3, 2017-273BZ, 975 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
We have proof of service of initial hearing to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. The total linear feet of retained wall on the exterior is not correct, since this is a straight line extension of the 8-foot 9-inch side yard. 10-foot 6 feet of the perimeter shown as retained is being removed at the cellar, which is the support of the first floor. So how is that area being retained on the first floor? Not just the first floor, it's the support of the second floor. They need to correct the cellar plan to show retention of that portion of the cellar wall. Otherwise, it becomes a cantilever and you have to restructure your whole house. All the floor joists, including the first floor, are being relocated. I didn't understand the need for that. The floor-to-floor heights are already 10 feet. And by doing that, it's effectively a demolition of the building. The proposed FAR exceeds 1, so they need to bring it down to a maximum of 1.0, not 1 point something, right? The proposed side yard width on one side is 8'8" on the zoning calculation page, but on the plans, it's 8'9" on the survey, so the survey is correct. They have to use that number. The total width of side yards required is 13 feet. The proposal is reducing the degree of noncompliance. So the new portion needs to maintain the 13-foot total width. They need to justify the second floor rear yard at 20 feet. The adjacent properties have deeper rear yards, and it's not clear at what height their rear yard obstructions reach or to what depth. So they need to provide information on the heights, not just the number of stories, but the heights. And they should pull back the second floor and the attic to a minimum of 25, but feet, but that just depends on what we're learning from the neighbors. The proposed building height exceeds neighboring heights that are 35 feet. They should bring it down. The attic floor-to-ceiling height is very high at 10'7". I don't understand why you need 10'7" attic floor-to-ceiling. The proposed open space ratio is very low compared to the neighborhood standard. This is due to both the 20-foot rear yard, the shallow side yards, and the reduced front yard. I'm not sure that you can make an argument for that under neighborhood character. It doesn't fit within the character. And then, as always, add that note to the drawing because it's very tight here. Removal of existing walls and joists in excess of that shown on the plans will void the special permit.
With regards to the rear yard depth, I believe the current rear yard is not legally compliant, so they need to show that the existing yard is not legal, no document has been provided.
So, for instance, I think in the notice of comments, it was requested to provide a Sanborn map, like Sanborn maps, historic Sanborn maps for
I see, okay.
so that they could provide that for the side yards as well.
I believe they provided, I saw today some sample maps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And,
Or were they actually provided was the question.
Yeah.
okay, so they did provide. And Plan 1.3, which is the demo plan, it reversed the wall dimensions for the first and the second floor.
Okay. Item number 4, 2018-25 BZ 109 Workman Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval. The premise of this application is one about which we have in several other applications expressed dissatisfaction, that the BSA should waive parking requirements according to the limits of the special permit, and then the applicant goes to DOB to pursue, to limit the parking entirely. It is one thing when there is an existing building being converted to another use, but another when you have new construction where it's possible to provide parking. So I think the premise is wrong. In addition, on all of these special permits that request parking reductions, we ensure that on-site parking meets demand. Here, the demand study reveals that demand actually exceeds the zoning requirements. So I'm not sure where we're supposed to go from here. Parking on this site can be provided using automated parking systems and stackers that don't use ramps. The argument that they can't provide parking is because they're proposing a ramp, but ramps are ancient history at this point. If we look at the demand study, modal splits are based on other facilities operated by this same user. So I ask, is the public transit situation in this location equivalent to the other locations? According to the information provided, the site is only accessible by public bus. According to Google Maps, the nearest subway is almost a mile away. The two sites that were, from which the study was taken, the East Fordham Road location is along a very frequently running select bus route that services most subway lines. And the Linden Boulevard location is less than half a mile from the nearest number 3 train. So I'm not sure that it's appropriate to be asking people how they got here in sites where where people regularly come by public transit to get to those places. Trip generation rates are consistent, though, with the most recent DOT-approved analyses of 103.4 per thousand and 13% midday peak temporal splits. The description of the number of patients per hour doesn't actually jive with the fact of 10 exam rooms and 5 operatories. That sounds much more like 15 patients per hour with no one in the waiting room in a very easy-paced medical office that doesn't worry about insurance pressures. The current standard is you need to see a patient every 20 minutes, not every hour. So, and we have noise, air quality, and WRP sign-off. However, DEP has determined that there's a hazmat E designation necessary for the site.
Yeah, and WRP sign-off.
And what? Sorry?
And WRP and LPC sign-off.
Yeah, oh, and LPC,
I
okay.
think they're pretty much done.
Yeah.
LPC, oh.
Yeah, LPC does archaeological
Right,
work. Okay. Anybody else on this one?
Item number 5, 2018-194BZ, 2317 Avenue K, also known as 1086 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials, add of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board recommends approval with one abstention. Adequate existing material is being retained according to the drawings, although the joists are being raised at the second floor and attic level to give more head height. This is already a very big house because of the 6,000-foot lot size. The proposal essentially doubles its size and results in a very large house with 40 feet of building frontage on the side street. So we need to have a floor area study to compare how many square feet are in this house compared to its surrounds, and a frontage study. And of course, adding a note to the drawing about removal of existing walls and joists in excess of that shown on the plans will void the special permit. These really large house increases, basically, it's a house eating the existing house. You barely find any existing house left inside, but it's meeting the 50% kind of in-house rule. So, anybody else?
I have a note about the front yard is an existing non-compliance. And so since the board can't waive any front yard.
We
wait,
got a Sanborn.
We have a Sanborn. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sanborns just don't give you that much. I mean, if you're off by a foot or two,
Yeah,
no
but
way to know from a Sanborn. But yeah, I mean,
it's something to prove the
Yeah.
lawfulness of that non-compliance.
What's the best then?
well, the best method is, I don't know when
Survey that
this is a
dated
survey
from before.
or old drawings from the buildings department, you know, when they added a little something,
Yeah.
they filed at the buildings department. The similarity of this house to the houses along the way where everybody was built at the same time, that's really common. They all have non-compliant front yards, that kind of thing.
And Sanborn does indicate the similarity of this house with its abutting houses.
Right,
for this,
yeah,
the
so if it does
Sanborn
that, then you can measure, let's say, the abutting house, and if all of them have the same kind of front yard condition, then you say, okay, it was built in the 20s like this, or 40s.
But for this,
Yeah.
the Sanborn is acceptable. In this-
Sorry?
In this case, the
It would be based on the similarity with adjoining. with
I haven't looked at it, so I
Yeah,
can't
that's the
tell.
thing, so,
Okay.
okay.
Okay, this concludes the review session for March 18, 2019, from March 19, 2019. Hearing calendar, do you want to just keep going?
Yes.
Okay. We'll now move to the review session for the March 20th public hearing, 2017-171BZ. This is 1 East 70th Street, Manhattan. This is the Frick Collection.
Yeah.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. The community board resolutions failed in both a motion to approve and a motion to deny. So the community board takes no position on the application, so they were tied in both directions. Opposition to the project is represented by council. I would like to make clear in the record, because it was something that was stated in a letter from opposition council. I would like to make clear in the record that no BSA commissioners have met with opposition council, nor with representatives of the opposition or the applicant. In addition, no BSA staff have met with opposition counsel or their representatives. I am stating this because there is a letter in the record from opposition counsel dated March 5th, 2019, requesting a meeting with me and board staff
and I want to state here that such a meeting did not occur and was never entertained. I find only one other letter in opposition in the file, maybe things came in subsequently, and approximately 50 letters in support, so if things came in subsequently, we should have a count.
There were a few forms, but.
No, I call them letters. Sometimes they're forms, sometimes they're letters. So if you could give a better count on number of opposition and direct me to them, because I only found one. There are approximately 50 letters in support, many of which come from major museums and cultural institutions, mostly in New York City and occasionally from outside New York City. And so then into the application itself. There's a lot of talk about the American Alliance of Museums, the AAM, and I'd like to understand the role of the AAM and the meaning of being accredited by them. When it's a school, it's obvious. If you're not accredited, you're not a school. So it's very clear that when the accrediting institution walks around the school and says, you need a better science lab or something like that, the school really needs to provide a better science lab, but I don't understand how it works with a museum, so I'd like that explained. The main hardship, as I see it, really is that is complained of here, or let's say unique physical condition, really, is that the 1914 designated landmark and garden sits, or let's say it's a designated 1914 landmark building and garden, sits within the R10 portion of the zoning lot. So development is forced into the east and into the R8B limited height district. So it's the site forcing the development to go in a place where you can't do the work as of right. I'd like them to explain the slight differences in programming on the first floor between the proposed and the as of right. For example, they have an education classroom versus an open service area, like why they're not the same, because they have floor area to play with, and explain why the second floor in the as of right is not expanded in the same way as it is in the proposed, again, because there's no floor area limitation. And it appears that the floor area increases are occurring within the existing envelope, so why wouldn't the same kinds of floor area expansions be occurring in both the as of right and proposed? And also to clarify why the rear yard equivalent exemption in section 24-381 doesn't apply here. That states that, it states that in the districts indicated, which includes R8B, rear yard regulations shall apply, rear yard regulations shall apply to any zoning lot that includes a through lot portion which is contiguous. No, these are accepted through lots. So, I think I'm missing a word. No rear yard regulation shall apply to any zoning lot that includes a through lot portion which is contiguous on one side to two corner lot portions, and such zoning lot occupies the entire block frontage of a street. Yeah, it's no rear yard regulations apply in that case. So this is a through lot adjacent to corner lots.
I think they're going to explain it, but I think they looked into it and they're correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But they need another waiver for a little job
Yeah,
at the end.
yeah, so I'll get to that. So that, if this is the case and this exempts through lots, then it makes the as of right a different as of right where there's more natural development there, right? If you want to call it natural. I'd like them to explain why the third, fourth, and fifth floors of the as of right doesn't infill outside of the rear yard, now inside of the rear yard equivalent, between the garden, court, skylight, and the library building. So they were holding away from the library building there, and there's this big skylight, which of course you're not going to build on top of. That's part of the historic property, or the really old protected property, right? So, but why not fill in between that? And then they should show on the as-of-right and proposed floor plans where areas of noncompliance are. I found actually the drawings a little difficult to follow because only the sections and elevations show the areas of noncompliance, but I couldn't tell on the
floor plans, at what point an addition was falling within a required setback or required rear yard or something like that, right? So it's to understand at what point on the floor plans the building becomes too high to comply with the limited height district. And also, where the building penetrates the maximum heights and setbacks. I believe also the building increases the degree of noncompliance as to the limited height, 1A height, beginning at the 5th floor, which is at elevation 142 feet above an 82-foot average curb elevation. The statement of facts indicates this occurs somewhere in the building at level 4, but that isn't consistent with the sections and elevations. But I think actually the confusion is that there are different level 4s, and there's a place where the 4th floor is very high, and then another place where it's both a 4th and a 5th. So it's confusing the way it's described. So they need to make clear at what level the building starts to penetrate the limited height district. Also, I'd like to understand where the proposed increase in lot coverage is in the RAB. When I compare the roof plans of the as-of-right and the proposed, I don't find the uncovered portions that are described in the proposed. It's very hard to understand. I think they're saying they're infilling courtyards, but it's very hard to understand exactly where the courtyard. That one maybe I understand, but there's some others. That one, as in the one that's opposite the Pope Garden. The statement of facts, page 17, states that an as-of-right addition in the R10 portion could not increase lot coverage, yet the existing building corner lot portion is well under the maximum allowable lot coverage, so in the R10. So, and I note that adjusted maximum lot coverages don't apply to corner lots and through lots, so you have to treat them separately. Normally, this is an existing zoning lot, you would just do an adjusted maximum, but you can't with these two corner versus through lots. The statement of facts appears to indicate that lot coverage averaging is permitted across district boundaries under 7724, and this is not the case. So they need to correct that. I think it's not that the as-of-right is using it, but the statement of facts is sort of saying, not to worry, if this was an as-of-right building, you could average the lot coverage across the two zoning district boundaries, but you can't. Because of the corner lot condition. I also believe there is, which is what Jella was just talking about, there's a small interior lot portion that wasn't addressed in the submission that has to have a 30-foot rear yard, and that wasn't addressed, and so maybe they need another waiver for that. I don't know if it cites to a different section in the zoning resolution, so they need a different waiver. The statement of facts refers to the inability to expand the existing building, and the existing building is in quotes, and doing that as of right, because doing so would not be approvable by the Landmarks Commission, yet the proposed does expand the existing building. So does the term existing building refer to a specific portion of the building and not to its entirety? They need to clarify. So are we talking about the very early 20th century building as the existing sort of sacrosanct building, or are we talking about the whole complex? Because then it's not a true statement. Landmarks allowed its expansion. And I think it also would be very helpful for both the commissioners and the public to see a presentation by the applicant about the programmatic needs and why the as-of-right would not satisfy them while the proposal. So we know that we're going to have a big hearing on Wednesday that will be attended by a lot of people, and I think this is an opportunity which the applicant may have done already at the community board, but the attendance is always a little bit different. It would be really great for them to make a full presentation, I think, to show why the as-of-right proposal doesn't meet their needs and why the proposed does. And what their programmatic needs are, because for any museum goer, most of this is pretty common knowledge. People understand what museums need. So, and then they need to clearly explain why expansion within certain areas that are not subject to height setback and rear yard requirements are not feasible. So to that point, when I was looking at this and at how much the as-of-right gives up, the actual as-of-right that was submitted to us, how much it gives up by not expanding outside of the envelope at all. I'm thinking that the most direct analysis actually would have been, and probably should be done, and I don't know if there's enough time to do it, but you have till Wednesday, to show additions that would be able to be done that comply with the street wall and setback regulations. So you move all of that additional floor area to the front of the building. These would then sit forward of the rear yard equivalent, which no longer applies anymore, so now you could spread it out more, right? Or we think it no longer applies. And on existing structures, the additions would not increase the degree of noncompliance, but would clearly describe their impact on the historic structures. You would see, okay, if we put a box on top of this section, that's what it would look like, but it would comply. And without actually going to the Landmarks Commission, there's really no way to know whether the commission would find such proposals acceptable. So you can't assume the denial on the part of the other agency. And I do have to say that I may not be up to date. There may be different ways of looking at things today at Landmarks Commission when I was more familiar with how they operated. But what I remember was that the Landmarks Commission never required owners to obtain City Planning Commission or BSA waivers for otherwise as-of-right enlargements. They might lament that there was no waiver opportunity because, for instance, historic districts where everyone has a street wall line that just runs straight across the whole neighborhood, and then contemporary zoning requires a setback at some odd floor, like the 6th floor. Meanwhile, street walls are all going to the 15th floor. Landmarks Commission would lament that there was no way of modifying that, but they would never require the owner to go and get a waiver, right? Because the waiver wasn't guaranteed. So it would just sort of work within the parameters of what's allowed as of right. So I think that would be very instructive to see what would be allowed as of right without imagining how Landmarks would react to it. In our materials, we have Landmarks Commission LPC submissions dated 2018 with red crossouts on them, and a 2019 set that isn't as complete as the 2018 set. The 2019 set has no crossouts. So I'd like submitted a complete LPC approved perforated set without crossouts if that exists, because the red crossouts are basically cross out the whole section of the building that it's sort of, this drawing doesn't apply as to this area. So, and I'd also like them to discuss why a solution like the Morgan Library subterranean expansion is not feasible here. I think people in opposition always imagine that everyone should be able to do the Morgan Library, and there's reasons why everyone doesn't do the Morgan Library. And those are my comments.
I thought the programmatic need statement that was provided was very thorough and helpful in understanding the deficiency the facility currently faces, especially with regards to, they have indicated the increased number of programmings that they have had over the years and the significant amount of new visitors that are coming and trying to accommodate that in this space. And given that this is an old building, different level changes, the building is almost not ADA compliant. And in terms of, and so many of their education programs cannot be attended by people with disabilities because of lack of ADA accessibility. I think that was a very strong argument. The other part was that given that this is an art museum, they need to maintain art museum, they need to conserve, and there isn't enough space for conserving. This museum is known for its library and the amount of information it keeps, historic information, and there's inadequacy in terms of the space. It was designed with a certain amount of projection, but they have definitely overrun it. So I thought from a programmatic argument, they've made a very strong case as to need for an expansion, as to where that expansion will be, is what we are discussing here. And barring the LPC, I think what they were definitely trying to do is contain the density, the massing, I would say, contain the massing as far away from the main, the historic building on that fronts Fifth Avenue, because that is a signature building, and try to kind of keep it in the shadow of the existing tallest building that would minimize the appearance of the density from all various angles. So I thought that was a very good attempt that they have made in trying to keep it as less visible as possible. However, there is protrusion, and I think that's what we're here to discuss and better understand why that is the ideal space. From programmatic, I can understand how the library space and the museum space and the staff office spaces are being connected, and that is a requirement, but are there other ways of achieving it without seeking a BSA?
To me, it's understandable that a building that was built a century ago and for a use that was personal residential use would have deficiencies that would need to be cured over time, from time to time, in terms of making it more programmatically satisfactory, basically. And I find that their statement of programmatic need was very thorough, and I was able to follow along and note the different changes throughout time. I actually thought the application was very well done.
Yeah, I would second that. This is one of the best applications I've reviewed where they have really gone through the existing as of right and proposed to kind of indicate how the programmatic need is being met partially in as of right, and the existing where the missing pieces, especially those pathways and the connections, those were very, very helpful, and how the proposed addresses that and connects the buildings and the services that a museum needs, the critical elements of the museum, taking care of the artwork, transporting the artwork, preserving the archives, all of those, I think was very clearly laid out. I agree with Commissioner Brown on that.
And it was further supported by the statements made in support from like the Guggenheim and the Whitney, all stating that this is the natural course for a museum, and this particular type of museum has these particular needs, and like small, they have small, so you don't want to be in a big high room ceiling when you're showing small pieces of art. I think it fell well together. I think those statements in support really lent a lot to their argument.
Any others? No? Okay.
That's it. Okay, this concludes the public review session for March 19th, 2019.